Welcome back to Incremental, the continuous improvement podcast. I'm Devin Bedoni.
And I'm Uriel Eisen, and this is our theory episode.
Theory for the week. And we're going to be looping back to Kanban, and we're going to try and apply it to maybe a little bit of a challenging application, specifically my workflow in a job shop. We're thinking it might be helpful because in attempting to apply it to a sort of out-of-the-box scenario, hopefully we'll go in depth into some of the more like fundamental aspects of it, talk through the challenges, and hopefully, go through our thinking and hopefully learn something ourselves as we kind of interrogate this concept.
Yeah, and we'll hit how Kanban saved me $100,000.
Yeah.
Just touch on that. And also pulled up the 6 rules of Kanban from the Toyota production system written by Teiichi Ono.
Yeah.
So I feel like going over those might also be kind of handy.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to hit us with your quote first before we jump in?
Let's hit a quote. Where is this quote? The most damaging rules are not the ones we can see, but the ones we can't. From Rick Rubin. So reading a book by Rick Rubin, this jumped out at me. And as applied to lean, I think a big reason this is such a shift is because, as we discussed in episode 17, it is a huge shift to jump from local efficiencies to starting to look for those global efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a whole layer of rules we cannot see,
right?
Which is like absolute efficiency instead of, I think, how I grew up and how everyone talks about manufacturing is really focused in the like nitty gritty operations, not the overarching systems. And so so I felt like that quote kind of touches on that. And also around just like brainstorming and product development and problem solving in general, I think the common theme is always like getting good at realizing there's stuff you don't know yet.
Yeah.
You need to try things to find out.
I think also maybe just realizing this the same thing, that people in general aren't necessarily good at these overarching systems thinking is, well, one, it's hard to see, but in business, without like a lot of good data collection, it can be hard to get a view into like what your changes do. It can often feel like you're making these decisions just based on gut a little bit. And then even after, even at this point where it's like, we have some data collection, we have, some like accounting tools to view this stuff at, like the shifts are slow. And there can be question about like, okay, what actually did cause this, overall systems efficiency change? Was it this change that we made? Was it some other little thing that we didn't even account for that was a byproduct or totally disconnected?
And how does that?
I think it's just legitimate that we tend to focus. There's a legitimate reason we tend to focus on operational things and like, in-station efficiency and all these things, is because it's like, it's easy to see, it's easy to measure, and make comparisons. And in business, the big system stuff is very amorphous. And if you don't have data collection, it is oftentimes all kind of gut.
And even if you do have data collection, it's often not. We just had this conversation the other day. Me and Sam, just like, in the Toyota way, they give that famous example of like intentional overproduction with the gutter company.
Yeah.
Right. Like there is no one answer for every scenario. And so I think even once you are sort of made aware of the big systems thinking and like trying to zoom out, it's often very difficult or for me has been difficult to analytically come to a conclusion about exactly where that balance is of like, should we be focused on production leveling in this scenario, or should we be focused on minimizing inventory or I mean, it's just, it's tough. So
yeah, for sure.
Should we jump right into Kanban? Do you want to go over the 6 rules?
And yeah. So
yes,
I felt like the rules and their kind of purpose was very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, and I pulled these out of the Toyota production system by Taiichi Ono, which is sort of like the
it's their
original
internal text, kind of, right? Or did they
internal made external? I think.
Did they revise it again later, or is that it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
What year was that published? Do you know?
Let's see here.
Looks old.
It does look old. I don't know. I'll have to 1912 to 1990. I think that's when he was alive. 1926.
That can't be.
No. Anyway, on with the show.
Yes.
So number 1, should we do?
Let's do the rule and then what it does. So, yeah, number 1, later process picks up the number of items indicated by Kanban at the earlier process. This is the rule.
And then the purpose is it provides pickup or transport info. So I think that's just that on the card you can indicate where you're picking it up,
what it is, how
in
many,
what container, all that kind of info.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I was going to kind of loop back to this in our later discussion, but I think fundamentally it can be as simple as what and how many.
Yes.
And then you can, add as much information as is applicable and not constraining, depending on your application, right? So yeah, it can be like, what container do you put it in?
Where I would say with all of this, it would be a mistake to look at exactly how Toyota is doing it now and go like, I need to get there to start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Number 2.
Earlier process produces items in the quantity and sequence indicated by the Kanban. And this is providing production information. So not just what and how many, but how many and how, kind of.
And in what order. So this is big. I mean, we struggle with this now, and I cannot imagine shifting like from like a big company and moving toward this. There's such a temptation to batch. So like when we have a bunch of like cam bodies and then the cams, and they're all in the Kanban card holder, and it goes like cam body, and each one is a new setup on the machine.
Yeah.
It is deeply tempting to reorder those a little bit.
Yeah.
And it causes big problems.
Yeah. Number you want to go ahead?
Yeah. It was just number 3, no items are made or transported without a Kanban.
Mm-hmm.
So again, like we've Kanbaned particular systems in our shop, and only lately have we tried to get to a point where every single thing that moves in the shop has a Kanban, and it has already caused uncertainty to sort of be surfaced, because if you see anything without a Kanban, there's it's like, what is this?
Yeah.
Like you just look at it and you're like, wait, I don't know what I'm doing with this. I don't know.
A distinction that I think it's important to make for, that took me a little while to think through, and I'm still figuring out how to apply, is that within a flow cell, you don't Kanban internally, ideally.
Right.
So like it doesn't need to be applied to every single operation within a process. It can be applied to a group. I'm kind of imagining it as like anywhere that there is a buffer or transport is where you want it. If things flow smoothly within a process in even numbers, you don't need a Kanban within that situation.
You don't need one, but it is still often useful if it makes sense. Like we have Kanbans follow parts through the paint department, even though the paint department is a flow cell, sort of cell, because it tells you what you're meant to do to them, like what color to paint them, in what quantity, etc. So the purpose of number 3, which is no items are made or transported without a Kanban, is prevents overproduction and excessive transport.
Yep.
Number 4, always attach a Kanban to the goods. Feels a little bit like number 3.
I do think this is, well, the description serves as a work order attached to goods.
So I guess that's sort of what I was just saying about the paint, right? It's like, what am I meant to do to this?
Yeah. Which, as we grow from being a one-man show to a multi-person situation with
smooth working machine.
Yeah, right. With many, many different jobs in the shop, the importance of work orders are becoming very clear.
Yeah, so I guess this is essentially a traveler, right? You've been calling it a traveler.
Yeah.
Could be
a lot of different things.
To be a Kanban, right? It's info traveling with the parts.
Yeah, I think maybe in general machine shop parlance, like a traveler is more than a work order. Maybe not.
Okay.
Like I think of a traveler as also including prints and
I see. Yeah,
stuff.
Fair
but
enough.
But I think yes. Yeah, number 4 sort of seems like numbers 1 through 3 sort of wrapped into one as like a reminder a little bit. Number 5, defective products are not sent on to the subsequent process. The result is 100% defect-free goods. So the description is prevents defective products by identifying the process making the defectives. I think that's kind of a roundabout way of saying you need to have QC between processes.
Yeah, in-station quality control.
Yeah.
And this one again, like, anyway, I feel like this is actually the reason this is a fun combination, like you and I talking about lean, is because I've implemented a lot of this stuff in an environment that is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
And now we have sort of a good like test bed use case to talk about in concrete terms to then try to apply to something more complicated to implement. But basically we've had like it's really easy to just sort of make and pass it, and then at the end of the process be like, oh, we had defects, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But if it always goes back to the station where they came from, like lately we've started racking parts, and there will be a few, like we have racks of 8 and there will be a few fingers on a rack that don't have parts, and it's like, hey, like what's going on with this? And this is something I will talk about in the Friday episode on practice, but we've implemented taking photos that go into our Trello board for our morning meeting. So any like, it just is less disruptive to flow to snap a photo of something that's out of the ordinary. And it's a really easy functionality to upload it.
Yeah.
So I've started doing that anytime I see anything. And so we can start sort of tracing it back to like where it came from. And it's been really helpful to start, like everyone knows they are seen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
So yeah, gives a little more energy to fix things.
Yeah.
And to know what to fix. Number 6, reducing the number of Kanban increases their sensitivity. And the explanation is reveals existing problems and maintains inventory control. So yeah, these are sort of self-referencing. Like number 3 is prevents overproduction and excessive transport, right? So that's suppressing inventory as well. And then number 6 says maintains inventory control.
Yeah, I think what they're trying to get at here is that reducing the number of Kanban in practice will mean reducing your buffers likely. And so it will reduce your overall inventory. But it's also a more fragile system in that there's less in process to
and intentionally from. So yes. Like people talk about it as a like a criticism of lean is its fragility.
Yeah.
But if you read about it, it is specifically called out as anytime it stabilizes, you reduce the inventories by reducing Kanban.
Yeah.
To make it break, like to surface the next biggest problem.
Yeah.
So that you can, and they even say in the book, like often you'll add back inventory once it breaks. And then deal with the problem and then reduce inventory again.
Interesting.
So those are sort of the 6. That was a little rambly, but
it's good to go over them because it can seem very simple. And I think remembering why it gets used is important. And then it's not a static thing. Once you've implemented, it's not just like done forever. You should revisit.
Right. And I would also say that I think the way we've successfully implemented Kanban is definitely giving ourselves a lot of leeway. And so these rules have been useful in every time we sort of feel like, okay, things are pretty stable. We'll go, I'll revisit these sometimes and then go add info to the Kanban cards and then go, it's just like a helpful guide because it's not static. And I've definitely started, like, it was just such a big lift to implement Kanban the way I've seen it implemented at most shops that are posting videos about Kanban. It's like, I don't know, we weren't about to do that. And so like I ended up ordering, I forget if we talked about it on here. I just ordered like brightly colored flashcards and like index cards, and then just used Sharpies to make our Kanban to start with, because you can literally just write the item on there. Don't write a minimum or a maximum quantity. Don't write where you ordered it from. Nothing. Literally write what you need on there and never order anything externally without a Kanban. As a first step, makes everything in the shop have a Kanban. And then every time you interact with it, you can add details, right? But it's already such a big step forward, just knowing that things will self-trigger. That you're not like, we had an order that was meant to ship, and then we didn't have, this was early days, but I still remember it. We had a big order, it was meant to ship, and we ran out of the plastic bags we shipped them in. And so we had like 300 parts bagged in one bag.
I remember you called me. You were like, do you have this size bag?
And it's like definitely amateur hour, except it's actually a lot more common than people like to talk about. When this happened, a buddy of mine, I was telling him about it, and he was like, that's funny you say that, because we had a big order that was meant to ship, and we realized we didn't have enough nuts. And they manufacture these like massive industrial machines that they couldn't ship because of nuts. So anyway, Kanban's cool.
I think there's a key point there, which is making not trying to have it be perfect right at the beginning, which I'm generally guilty of.
Aren't we all?
Making it easily editable and add toable, and just put in, we've kind of like found that with our tooling organization situation a little bit, where it's like, start with what you got, make it so that you can adjust and add as time goes on.
And I think something I've been getting better at with making improvements is realizing that we will want to make edits. And so like shying away from systems that are too rigid, kind of, at least in a first implementation, because it's often not what you're going to end up with. I'm going to steal the quote for our next episode, and we'll just use it twice. Also, Rick Rubin, all or nothing thinking is a non-starter. Which I feel like is a great quote, because it's a non-starter because you just won't start, right? If you're like, okay, I'm going to implement Kanban the way I see it implemented, it's going to be like a week-long project, and then it's like, well, I have production to do, so.
Or if you're like really, really perfectionist, all is never attainable. So
that's true,
you will literally never start. So I was listening back to some of our earlier episodes, just because I love to hear us talk. No, I think I was listening back because I feel like we've covered a lot, and it's also very easy to kind of like discussing things in this forum. It's sort of easy to feel like we've kind of like, oh, we tackled that, we dealt with it a little bit, even though most of it hasn't been dealt with or tackled. And so I was kind of just going back and getting reminders and things I want to revisit.
Very cool.
And you had made a comment when we were first discussing my job board, that I just kind of glossed over earlier. And so in thinking through my process, I've attempted to change my mindset to thinking about what we provide as like this, bucket of services as a whole. But it's still very hard not to think about the physical items that we're producing as sort of being the unit. Because for most of our processes, that's kind of how we orient. Is around parts, like individual part numbers as a unit of organization. And so I was still imagining this kind of like Kanban triggering concept as being within like a silo of a part number.
So just to unpack this for listeners who aren't as in our heads or haven't listened to the previous episodes, I think what we're talking about is like, let's just take your dropouts.
Sure.
As a part. It's easy to look at that dropout as the thing your shop makes.
Yes.
Instead of looking at all of the steps of maybe from like a drawing to passing it to programming to actually getting it set up on a machine, like scheduled on a machine and set up on the machine, and the soft jaws that need to get designed and made.
Yeah.
And like each one of those handoffs is part of the process that the end result, yes, is a dropout. But by doing that, by looking at each step of the process that it needs to go through all the way to anodize, coming back in, getting shipped to your customer, by looking at each of those steps, suddenly it allows you to analyze it with the tools of like the Toyota production system and lean.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're just looking at the individual parts as a job shop, it's like, okay, I'm going to make 100 of these and then switch. So like, where's the what am I going to optimize? It just makes no sense.
Yeah. So I think effectively made that kind of like mental leap and change in perspective. But in terms of like Kanban and process flow, I was still thinking of sort of like each part number that we are producing as a silo of like triggering. So like we receive an order for that part, that triggers the next step back for that part, that triggers the next step back for that part, instead of thinking of our whole system in the shop as a Kanban flow of the cumulative like gathering of all of these different processes for all of the parts. And not to let myself off the hook, but I think a little bit for good reason, because when when you try and look at all this, it starts to, when you try and look at all the different parts, it is a little bit chaotic.
For sure.
Which like fundamentally the first rule of Kanban was later process picks up the number of items indicated by Kanban at the earlier process.
Right.
So when you're trying to just apply this basic concept, the very fundamental concept of Kanban to this situation, you end up in a scenario where at some steps you're handing off physical goods and at some steps you're handing off information. And then you go, okay, so how many? And when it stops being well, first of all, if you're talking about the physical goods part, that can vary from like 1 to several thousands. So like setting a standard unit stops working.
Right.
Then the temptation is to switch to time, perhaps.
Yeah.
But then how do you apply that to
where time would sort of be like, we'll run it in a unit of a day.
Sure.
Or something
Yeah,
like that.
something
Like we'll
like
cut
that.
enough stock for a day of running on the mill.
Yeah.
And then we'll run it on the mill for a day.
Yeah, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And that, but all, that starts to break down too, where you're like, okay, so we have some jobs that are a half a day. So maybe we make it a half day unit. Then we have some jobs that are 9 weeks. So how does that fit into this system?
Yeah.
And then when you kind of you're like, okay, we got to like back to like the core production process where it's pretty easy to fit it into this time scale. And then the next step back is like a programming process that doesn't fit in that same time scale at all very effectively.
Are you saying that programming can take like 3 days?
No, I'm saying that it usually takes a manner of hours. So then maybe you're not looking anymore at the duration of the task, but at the duration of the upstream task it feeds or something. Anyway, this is why it's been challenging.
Upstream or downstream?
Sorry, downstream.
Okay.
So I want to talk about it.
Yeah. So what I just wrote down, just so I wouldn't forget here, hearing you say this, it just occurs to me right now you are effectively using a Kanban system, a one loop Kanban system where the Kanban is the purchase order, right? And then it sort of breaks down because it turns out that that's not that you're not actually doing batch production through your shop. If you always committed to doing full batch production, because a Kanban is a batch.
Sure.
Right? So you could say, okay, I just got a Kanban from my customer saying, please make me 5 of these. And in that case, you are going to treat it as a batch. You'll go cut 5 parts on the, you'll program it.
Sure.
You'll cut 5 parts. You'll make your soft jaws. You'll machine 5 or maybe 6. I don't know.
Yeah.
Prove it out and then machine 5, pass it on to
sure.
whatever the processes are. And then if you say we are going to do 100 parts, you might still batch that, right? You might still, but even already you are trying to move away from the 100 batch in your op 1, op 2 across the mill, right? You're trying to do single piece flow through your mill cell. And so suddenly it's not a batch on your mill, but it is treated as a single batch in programming, because programming 1 and 1,000 is the same, which is the beauty of programming. And so, and then if you jump up again to like 1,000 parts, or 10,000 parts, you're really not going to be batching it as a batch of 1, even though it is a Kanban, a single Kanban that hit your shop floor.
Sure.
I just wrote that down because I think it starts to, like, you're not outside of how Kanban works. It's just that then internally, I think it's becoming clear that you need buffers at certain stages and Kanbans for those.
Yes. And
upstream processes.
I kind of had been coming to, I wasn't specifically thinking about it as Kanban, but we were like, the job board layout that we did was really good. It was a big improvement in terms of seeing the status of each part in process. It wasn't providing a lot of visibility into what to do next, which is what we've been discussing a lot lately.
Yeah.
Which Kanban, if implemented properly, takes care of, right? Like, things happen when they need to happen because something asked for them to happen.
Yeah.
More or less, assuming there's labor.
My shop notwithstanding.
Yeah.
It's not properly implemented, I think, is the reason.
But so I've already been thinking of like, okay, so how do we separate this a little bit in process? But in trying to sort of apply, like, which I think is a valuable mental exercise, if nothing else, how to apply like a somewhat strict Kanban process to that. Getting into the details of it, it starts to be a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
And so I, in trying to like sketch it out a little bit yesterday, I was sort of imagining maybe just breaking the shop into sort of like 3, even though they're not really flow cells, but like,
that's what I was just gonna recommend.
Yeah, kind of like 3 flow cells that, and I don't even know if the order is the trigger, sort of, because it's like it doesn't exist in our shop until there's an order. Like, you can think of, like, I guess one really big difference between what we're doing and maybe what you do or Toyota does is, like, you have the ability to produce things like that nobody has ordered, right? So Kanban in that scenario is largely like to suppress overproduction. If a thing exists in our shop, it's because somebody has ordered it.
Yeah, though for job shops, sometimes that's not true, right? Like, you'll get an order for 100 and they'll be like, we might want 500. And so some people will make 500.
Sure.
But I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
You don't design a part preemptively and then.
Yeah. Right. So I guess the subtle distinction that I'm trying to make there is that it's, while it is like about suppressing like in-station overproduction, I think our primary goal is more about how to effectively use a limited labor pool. So not like putting energy to something that isn't necessary immediately. Like, everything that's going to happen needs to get done, but it's about what do we do when and in what sequence.
Yeah. And to put that into concrete terms, it is obviously wasteful to have an employee spend a week cutting up stock for a job that's going to run for 9 weeks. Right. You'd have them do like a day or an hour, more likely.
Sure. Yeah.
And then use that stock and then go back and cut more later.
Yeah. So where was I going with that? I'm not sure if like shipping needs to like trigger production.
Well, so I guess a few things. I think thinking about, so the fact that your shop is so sorry. Just thinking about the fact that your shop is small means that processes are not separated out spatially. But it might be helpful, which sounds like you're already doing this, but just starting to identify like particular, I don't know if cell is the word, but like particular flows. Like you have your cutting department, which is separated out into a separate room, and then you have maybe that passes to your machining department, which then passes to your shipping, pre-anodized shipping department,
Sure.
or QC, and then
Sure.
to there, and just like separating them out in an explicit way would start to tell you where your Kanban loops are. And then you would basically trigger, like start to figure out some way of triggering those Kanban loops.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, kind of what I'm coming to is that for two reasons. One is for the information flow, because unless when you receive a purchase order, you like populate custom Kanbans all the way through the system, the information needed upstream in the system isn't there. So unless you do that, it just breaks down immediately because you don't know what to order and how many to make and etc.
Right.
So what I'm kind of imagining is separating completely the system of information for particular part numbers, quantities, materials, drawings, etc., from the Kanban process, and have the Kanban process only be for the standard processes in our shop and like based on a unit of time, I think. So
That is a cool way of looking at it.
yeah, so I think like I'm sort of just ignoring shipping right now because it's just not like things just land there and then they disappear.
Yeah.
But I think it would still exist as sort of a cell. But yeah, that we would have like effectively a Kanban card for like 2 days worth of machining, and then an inventory buffer prior to that for 2 days worth of machining. I think that's how it would work. And so we would want to have job tags that their time estimates were a cumulative 2 days worth of machining
Right.
on the machine Kanban, and then also in the inventory buffer Kanban. And as soon as one moves out to the next process, the prior moves in, and then we see that we have a gap to fill there. And I don't know if it's like we are just moving tags or we actually have physical Kanban that move, on a board or around the shop. Like it might actually be useful to have them move around the shop. Like recently, because right now we don't have a good system for seeing like good visibility of sequencing in the shop.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of go over this on a daily basis about like what's going to go on which machine, when, and how. Like right now, our system gives very good visibility into, if you look at an individual part, where it is in its process, but like parsing that across the whole shop is pretty challenging. So right now, Ariel has started in our morning meetings. We'll be like, okay, this is going on this machine next. This is going on this machine next. She'll pull one of our little sticky tags for that job, and then just like put them on the individual whiteboards at the machine in sequence, so that like she has a good idea of what's going where. Which is it's cool that she started doing that, and it's an interesting stopgap. But it begs the question of like, is this something that only exists at our job board? Do we stop having a job board and distribute these around the shop to individual stations? I don't even know how that would work, like what it would look like physically.
Interesting. Well, I guess like hearing you say that, I'd seen a tour, I forget where it was, but a shop that had some CNCs. It was a cabinet shop. They added, as an improvement, they added a board, like a big physical board above each machine that had 5 slots, I think.
Yeah.
And they were color coded behind. And so if you had a traveler hanging on that board, it would cover up the like red color, right? So you could glance across the shop and see that it's green and you're good.
Yeah.
And that sort of gets to your like buffer of programming, right?
It does. It doesn't deal with the variable
time
unit
element.
Yeah.
So I really like your idea of thinking about, well, two things. I think it's a great idea to Kanban your processes that are standard, because if you start Kanbaning your parts, it's like going to be a whole mess.
It's impossible.
And every time you sort of, so like, I really like that idea. And I feel like it's in keeping with the concept of applying TPS to job shops by almost ignoring the parts you're making.
Yeah.
Right.
Largely.
Yeah. Like it's basically a series of handoffs from one process to the next. And those processes are largely consistent.
Yeah.
I mean, have variation. Like it might hit the mill or the lathe, then the mill, or it might just hit the mill. But
yeah,
those are all pretty. I wonder if it would make sense to just apply Kanban to your machines, to your like just start on your machining centers and think like I would probably do it on the board on each machine and have
at each machine
and have each slot represent a certain amount of time. Like say each slot on the board was half a day or an hour, or I don't like, you'd have to come up with something that works.
Are you saying a board at each machine or a designated spot on the board for each machine?
I guess either way, whatever. I don't know. Whatever makes the most sense is the next step.
Well, I think on the board is the simpler option as a next step.
Yeah. So do it on the board.
Yeah.
And then when the things get triggered, it goes in a very specific place. Like you're essentially Kanbaning the information flow from your machines to your programming department, which is you.
Yeah.
And I feel like that would be a great place to start just testing that concept.
Yeah.
And I really like the idea of thinking about it in units of time. And obviously it's an estimate, but at least that would tell you.
Yeah, it's a lot more than absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and the real struggle, I would imagine, not being there, is that like it's totally amorphous at this point. And so like your R450 might be running for the next 5 weeks, but there's no way of seeing that you're all set. Like today, that machine is good, but in your head, you know it.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, what do I need to program next? And that largely has to do with which machine is going to be idle.
Yeah.
Not in what order did the jobs come in or the request for quote or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of up to you to like walk around the shop and go like, oh, our lathe is.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So yeah, I feel like that would be a great place to start and really addresses the current problem, which is you have like, I don't know, this is me not knowing theory of constraints well enough, but you have like 2 bottlenecks, which I know is not possible, which is sort of like labor, but also your machines, right?
Well, you can have multiple bottlenecks, right? Like one is just
but there's a root bottleneck.
Sure.
I mean, because you were saying the other day that like in terms of numerically, the machines are not a bottleneck. Exactly.
Yeah. This was part of the thinking, is just like, so I shared that thing about the screens on the brother machines that give you your breakdowns, and like looking at them, it's very clear that they're not.
Interesting. Like numerically, they are not a bottleneck.
Yeah. Which I think is like this interesting thing of going back to like global view perspective. And you were talking about that kind of in your pricing the other day.
Yeah.
Of being like, okay, these are my estimates for like what time goes into stuff and blah, 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 blah. At the end of the day, like we make this many parts, we can make this much money. Like, how does this break out? And similarly, when trying to like assess your shop, I think it can sometimes be cool to just be like, okay, regardless of why at the moment, these machines run anywhere from, on a bad day, 10%, on a really good day, 85%. So maybe let's call it a 50% average.
Right. How do we get that to 60?
Yeah.
55.
75 would be nice.
No, totally. But I just mean like, what's the next step? Yeah. So I guess your bottleneck is essentially a scheduling question. Like making sure that everything is perfectly lined up when that machine stops.
There's a lot of things to tackle there.
Sure.
But just like it's really easy to be like, we need to get these parts pulled through these machines,
yeah,
uh,
like yeah, very nice.
It can really feel like the machine is the bottleneck,
right?
And because that's where you see it, is like, there's 30 parts that still have to be made on this machine before this order can be fulfilled.
Yeah,
and not see the hour that it sat idle prior to starting to run, or the half a day that it sat idle while we were figuring out details or doing a setup, or we just didn't have another person. So that machine was idle because there was 2 other people doing setups on other machines, or whatever the case may be.
Interesting. So there's also a okay, so that would point to having that board on one place,
Yeah.
with all the machines stacked on top of each other, like vertically, where each one is a row. And then that a changeover, you can't have more, that you would have like an orange sticker magnet that you stick on the board per changeover, and you can't have more than 2 orange. Right now you have 3 employees.
Oh, that's an interesting
you can't have
idea.
more than 2 vertically aligned, 2 orange magnets, right? Because
this is gonna get tricky.
Well, I'm just thinking like that. It's sort of an intersection of, you need to have information at the machine of what to set up.
Yeah.
Which could be Kanban. You also need to have a person there.
Wait, how would you Kanban the information?
The information would be like a traveler that hangs on this, or like once it's populated, you stick a green tag in that cell, or in the next 5 cells, and it just calls back to a job that's on your other job board right next to that. I don't know. I'm making this up. Right. You'd have some way of tagging it that, like, okay, this job is estimated to run for the next 6 hours. So we're going to put 6 tiles for the next 6 hours. These are all green tiles, which at the moment, green represents the dropouts.
Sure.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Say purple. Purple represents the dropouts. And then you put an orange tag at the beginning of that. So you need, that means the information is there, right? You have documented the setup. You have the program proven out. You have the program prepared. Ready.
Yeah.
So then there's going to be someone who, for that first hour, is probably doing a setup and a prove out. I don't know how long that takes. An hour?
Hopefully.
Yeah. So let's just say that's one. So that tile is going to be orange. I'm making this up again. Or have an orange tag on it. And you can't have more orange tags in one vertical slot than you have employees.
Yeah.
And it might even be a -1 that you aim for.
Absolutely.
Something.
Yeah. Someone's got to still keep the other machines running.
Yeah. And then you need to make sure, I would imagine another breakdown is, that tool is not here or not set up, or.
We don't hit that too often these days. Okay.
So it's mostly people availability?
It's mostly people and skills.
And skills?
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
I mean,
at this point, you could have a tile for each person on that board, right? Where it's like, okay, who's doing this changeover?
Yep. I'm trying to visualize all these different things in my head right now. It's kind of
because then at a glance, you'd have to see that, like, we have 3 machines that are going to estimated to need a changeover within an hour of each other. That's probably a bad thing. Is there something we could shuffle around?
Yeah. I mean, really, like, we're probably looking for a granularity of a half day more than an hour. Like, if we see that we have like 4 setups that need to happen on the same day,
that's a problem.
That might be a problem. I mean,
so then
we get through that now.
Is that actionable? Like, what would you do if you saw that? Is there, like, I'm trying to think what you would scooch around.
I think you might not scooch anything around. I think you might just try and front load preparation in a different manner. Or you could potentially scooch jobs around and say, okay, this is going to be a problem on this day. So we're going to shunt that job, to the next.
Or can anyone work late, right? Can anyone start earlier that day or something? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
I feel like we're getting a little far down the road of, like, I think the basic. So the part that we're missing here too is that we still have to be able to designate in a clean way the status of all the other processes in that job that are not dependent. So, so for example, cross machine scheduling, where a machine goes from a lathe to a mill.
Yeah.
And how do we designate? We need to have a way on whatever that little job tag traveler is to designate that it still needs to go to this other thing. It hasn't been done yet, or that it's going to need to get anodized. And maybe there's a way to separate these out so we're not trying to carry so much information in one place.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is you could just start basic and see what that teaches you.
Yeah.
And then say, okay, now we need to figure out this other piece. The other option would be to make each machine horizontal row a mechanically separate magnetic strip, so that you could reorder them. So you could always put a lathe above the mill that it's going to feed, because that sounds like the most common.
That is the most common.
Right. So you could scoot around the lathe, and then you could put the magnets that indicate a job flow onto the other bar or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know. Something. I probably wouldn't worry about it maybe ahead of time.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably will be an issue.
Well,
but I think what this is really pointing to is the fact that like these moments of changeovers are a really critical thing where a lot of things need to conflue, which is a word that should exist. So there's converge and convergence.
Yeah. And confluence.
There's confluence, so there must be conflu. Anyway, right, like everything needs to come together.
It's a major pinch point in the shop, for sure.
A major.
Yeah.
So like they should really be highlighted and sort of talked about as like how are we going to tackle this team?
Yeah.
Right. So it goes it's almost like the race car pulling into the pit stop. And right. It's like, how do we make this all go really smoothly?
Yeah.
And if there's a lack of focus on that moment, and by moment, I mean 2 hours, I could imagine it sort of just happen. It's like, oh, who's doing this? Oh, is the stock cut? I mean, I'm not saying you're disorganized. You know, we have the same issue,
I mean,
right?
it like we have, I feel like right now we're in this situation. Like things are changing really fast as well. That was another thing going back and listening the last, some of the early episodes is being like, wow, that was just, I guess, not even 3.5 months ago now. And I feel like we have like been kind of zooming through some changes. We just had a new person at the beginning of that for the most, fairly new. He's like a month in. So lots changing very quickly, and we are making big strides. But I feel like we are in a very like awkward teenager phase. Like, do these pants even fit? And
and
we have moments of like, hell yeah, we just like we did everything so well this week. Everything went so smooth, and then just moments of like, to use the awkward teenager analogy, just like too many emotions. Like, you called your friend, they were with the girl that you had a crush on, and like everything falls apart. It's just like. Anyway, so
I mean, also it just sounds like there's a lot of factors that need to come together perfectly, and it's easy to get most of them right, but it is actually all of them need to be right for it to go smoothly.
Anyway, that's probably enough on that.
Cool. Well, so maybe to wrap up the episode, I'll just jump into how Kanban saved me $100,000. Sounds like clickbait.
Might be
clickbait.
Looks like
Stay
clickbait.
Tuned. No.
Sounds like clickbait.
No, so it really did. So we were planning on buying a new mill because I kept having a scenario where we were running the mill all day. And then the next day we were short on parts. And I was like, well,
you were like close. Like you had
I was
papers
very
to
close.
sign.
Yes. And I was just looking at it one day and I realized like all inventory represents human time and machine time. And so I'm like, it's impossible that we have, like, it's just a lack of planning. The fact that we have inventory here, but we don't have the inventory we need to ship. This is not a unique problem by any means. This is like why the Toyota production system exists, to be clear. And so what we ended up doing is so the machining department has a buffer before the paint department where we have bins of completed machined buckles that are ready for paint. And then the assembly department tells the paint department which ones to paint each day, which colors are needed, in what size. And what would happen is we had one Kanban, which is the way most examples of Kanban that I've found on YouTube or the internet are shown, right? It's like there's a pile of inventory, then there's a trigger point, and that's it.
Yeah.
That really didn't work for us.
Well, 2 Kanban, right?
Where are the 2? I feel like most people have a 2-bin system where they have 1 bin, and then when you finish that bin and you pull the second bin, there's a Kanban there that triggers a reorder.
Oh, you don't have a Kanban in the second bin as well?
You only have a Kanban in the second bin is the way most implementations are shown.
And you pull the second Kanban with the first bin.
When you're finished with the first bin, you pull the second bin.
Yeah.
And on the top of that second bin, before starting to use it, you have to take a Kanban card and
that
put
travels with the first bin.
That travels with the first bin. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess in my implementation, I often imagine having just for the sake of not moving the cards around, a Kanban in each bin.
But, so that's different, right? Because when you start using the first bin, you would have a trigger. Then you'd have a second trigger when you have the second bin.
This is a very semantic thing. I haven't imagined it being on top of the product.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's most of what's shown. So that's what we did is we had 2 bins of 32, and then we had a Kanban, and then we had 2 bins of 32. And that Kanban called for making 2 bins, I guess, of parts, maybe more. And so, but what would happen is we would use a bunch of parts. So then we'd trigger a Kanban and we'd basically be machining that part for like half or a full day.
Yeah.
And then the next day would come and paint department would say, hey, make, pink bodies and pink cams. But we had only machined cams the previous day. And so there weren't enough bodies.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, clearly we need another mill. But what actually fixed the problem was adding more Kanban to that same pile of inventory.
Yeah.
And so this really gets back to the 6 rules of Kanban. And this is sort of what helped me realize that as I reread this book is now each bin has a Kanban. And so each bin triggers a reorder. And that reorder the machining happens in the order of the reorder.
Yeah.
So we will have days often where we machine cams and then bodies and then cams and then bodies and then cams, right? Which you look at it and as the operator, there's a deep, deep, deep temptation to reorder those Kanbans because you don't want to do 5 setups. You want to do 2 setups.
Yeah.
What that does is basically makes a huge problem downstream where we have too much of one part and not enough of another part.
Yeah.
And so I think a ton of shops suffer from this problem where you get more equipment, but really what you need is smaller batch sizes.
Yeah.
And the way to achieve smaller batch sizes is larger quantity of Kanban that call for smaller numbers of parts.
Yeah.
So each one is a batch.
This is an interesting thing, looping like my job shop mindset.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm tempted to attempt the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, changeovers are, as we just discussed, like a big issue for us because every part is unique and new. And so it's an interesting thing to try and
I mean, I think it depends on your customers, because if you have a bunch of customers that each ask for a new part and that's sort of a one and done with that customer, or they'll come back in like 6 to 8 months with a totally different part.
Yeah.
That would be very different from a standing PO where you are a key part of their production.
Right.
And then what you'd really need, and this is why Toyota published this book and started educating all of their suppliers, is you couldn't really benefit from doing this unless your customers also ran in a lean way where they gave you small orders every week, right? Yeah. And they said, hey, just fit this in.
Yeah.
Right.
We have one customer that's like that, but it's like
that's cool.
It's a monthly thing.
Yeah.
But it's actually very useful. Like this last week, I had a very complicated part and it was like a day-long programming and setup. I was not proud of that. Probably could have been. I don't know. It was a big process. So then I was behind on lathe programming. This other job is all pre-programmed, goes on the lathe. So we're just like, okay, shove that in that hole.
Right.
Let's
that's awesome.
Keep making money.
Anyway, I think that's sort of where that would be super useful.
Yeah.
And you could even have those as Kanbans to populate that board, right? Yeah. Actually, maybe that's your lever to make sure that you don't have more than 1 or 2 changeovers on one day.
Is what?
Is run half a day of a standing PO job.
Oh,
right? Just to shuffle it, not because you're behind, but because you see it won't be a very smooth day.
Yeah.
Or something. I don't know.
Just be like, we're going to sacrifice an extra setup, but it'll be a minor setup because it's one we've done many times before.
Yeah. Or you might have 3 jobs in a row that are very short jobs. And instead of doing them all in a row, you stick in a day or half a day between each one of this other job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is a little bit more on the setups, but it staggers out your crisis days. So they are sub-crisis threshold.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's about time for us to wrap up. Hopefully this was enjoyable to people and you got something out of it. It seemed like a little in the weeds and rambly, but also the stuff is in the weeds, and like without talking about the gory details, it is a little hard to like pull apart and comprehend. So I think
totally. And I would say, to me, the big thing, the reason we started this podcast is because all of the content out there are people who have done this really successfully. And so all you're seeing is that sort of like surface level, wow, that's super slick and amazing.
Yeah.
And then you try it and you're like, this is difficult. And I can't find any information on other people thinking through this process.
Right. The problem solving along the way.
So
yeah. And I'm sure this is going to be an ongoing conversation as in our shop, as we test things and try things and advance this system.
100%.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, you can find us at Incremental CI on Instagram. You can find me at Lycan_MFG on Instagram.
And you can find me on Instagram at Austere Mfg. I almost forgot my own username. Thanks all for listening. Please continue tagging us in your improvements. Please leave reviews on the platforms you listen to this podcast, as it helps us, get listened to more and get more people involved in the conversation. It's really fun hearing from everyone. Positive and negative feedback is super welcome and useful and exciting. So thanks so much for listening.
We'll see you Friday.